With Return to Silent Hill in theaters, the conversation around it has been very, very negative. And to be fair, I can't blame them. But is it really as bad as people say it is? I mean, the short answer is yes, end of video, but that's not really a conversation, because there are people who did genuinely enjoy the movie, and while I'm not one of them, it feels lazy just to dogpile on this movie and say it's bad without considering the underlying problems. Because a movie like this doesn't just happen by accident. There's always some reason or another that makes a product turn out the way it does. And once you start piecing the movie together, it stops being a vague disappointment and starts feeling like a film fighting itself on screen and behind the scenes. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen it, which is probably most people, Return to Silent Hill is loosely based on Silent Hill 2, following James Sunderland searching for his girlfriend. And yes, I said girlfriend. After receiving a mysterious letter saying that she's waiting for him in Silent Hill, causing him to embark on a journey through this ghostly town where he's forced to confront his past and the darkness and guilt he holds within. Which, to be fair, is the same story as the game. It's a simple premise that should have translated easily, but clearly something went wrong. Because the original game takes that premise and expands upon it with its layered characters, fascinating lore, and mystery behind our protagonist that slowly gets revealed. It's a slow burn seeing how these people react to their own personal trauma. Some may succumb to it, others embrace it, but there's always a chance of moving past it. It's a game that many people consider a masterpiece, and that's why Silent Hill 2 has maintained its iconic status for decades. And that's why this adaptation is such a weird mess, because it had the easiest foundation imaginable, but it doesn't have the time to tell it. Where it misses out on the game's symbolism and themes, as its narrative is too confused on the kind of movie it wants to be, as it has two different stories fighting for our attention. One being a cheesy Hallmark movie of guy meets girl meets a parent cult who gives her terminal illness, and the other being an attempt at Silent Hill 2's psychological horror. Both vastly different in tone, yet trying to fit into one story, where anytime it tries to build suspense through its visuals, we cut back to an entirely different movie. And while its tone improves steadily, it sacrifices nuance in favor of holding the audience's hand to make sure those two stories can fit. It gets so bad sometimes to where they state basic actions, like, yes James, I see you have a map, you don't have to say it. But by having both of these narratives, it muddles James's actual character and progression, wasting its time on James's therapist, him getting into a bar fight, or being a Mustang driving hippie. Things that aren't relevant to James's psychological journey, especially when the movie is limited to such a short runtime. Where even if I appreciate the idea of showing what Mary and James were like before she kicked the bucket, I still think it plays a disservice to his current mental psyche. The only interesting change made was making him an artist, because that's a neat way to play with memory, idealization, and distortion of reality. And while it plays with the idea of James being very flawed, it ultimately abstains him from his guilt and crime, by not only changing his relational status to Mary, where they're dating instead of being married, but also Mary requesting that he kill her, making a psychological desire to receive punishment for his sins kinda meaningless, which in turn hurts Mary and Maria's connection to James, as the movie doesn't have time to play with the temptation Maria provides as an idealized version of his wife, forcing characters to explain it to the audience rather than letting it play out. And while I think the actress did good, considering what she had to work with, once the idea is established that different variations of Mary can exist, the movie goes way too far, revealing that Laura and Angela are different versions of Mary rather than separate unique characters, stripping them of individuality. But to be honest, I don't actually mind the original version of this idea, where Gons originally wanted Mary to have an abusive relationship with her father, to the point I can't state most of it on YouTube. YouTube censors be damned. Trust me, super different from the games, but if you were to keep Mary, Maria, and Laura, I can kinda see it. Obviously, if treated with the right execution and pacing, especially when that would remove the cultist subplot from the entire movie, which is good considering that sucked. Where, as crazy as this might sound, they should have cut Angela and Eddie from the movie entirely and focused on James and Mary, because I'd rather focus on James and do it decently than butcher all three. It also saves poor Angela from being Mary, Laura, Angela, blah blah blah. God, what a stupid scene. But if the film had just started with James entering Silent Hill and going on his journey to find his missing wife, not girlfriend, then it would have given the story more time to experiment with its psychological horror and presentation, rather than wasting time on two dysfunctional narratives, allowing you to stick to Mary being dead and Maria being the idealized version of her in James's mind that accompanies him, where Laura could serve as the young innocent version of Mary before her dad did certain things to her, who forces James to learn the truth about Mary's illness, where Laura could be a creation of Mary's psyche who becomes entrusted to James after he's able to accept himself and live for both his wife's sake but his newfound daughter. AKA, I'm doing the Leave ending. I know people really like In Water, but I don't know, Leave always made sense to me. That or the dog ending. But by doing this, it's able to maintain entities like the abstract daddy and keep the narrative focused on James and Mary, rather than the edgy speedrun we ended up with. And if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, they should have done that, then first off, thank you. But unfortunately, it's not that simple, cause no matter what, this movie was kinda compromised from the get-go. For example, its principal photography took place from April 2023 to February 2024, which includes reshoots. That means there's a 2-year gap of post-production, which movies typically don't have. Where initially a producer had left the project mid-production, causing financial strain on what ended up being a $23 million budget, funded by external sources, with executives enforcing a 2-hour max runtime in a more action-focused movie, causing a lot of footage to hit the cutting room floor. Another example of this mismanagement is that the previously mentioned cult initially didn't exist, or at least not to that degree, as Mary's abusive father was the primary cause for her illness originally, but allegedly, they weren't willing to afford the guy in mind and had to rewrite it. Why they couldn't get someone else cheaper? Who knows, but from the sounds of it, post-production was a nightmare, from getting VFX vendors to availability and distribution. Now, none of these are a defense for the movie's quality. I am taking this from IGN and a Q&A with the director. The writing is still the fault of Gons and his writing team, because with such a limited runtime, they should have stuck to something more concrete. Because for example, Jacob's Ladder is under 2 hours, and it's fantastic, as it plays into psychological horror with its mystery and ambiguity, telling you what you need to know to understand it, but keeping it vague enough to keep you enthralled, and everything feels justified and earned through its central character. And the Silent Hill series functions the same way. Heck, the first movie functions like this. As to why this didn't is far beyond me. But it's kinda disappointing to know that Gons' supposed vision was shut down in favor of cutting costs. Say what you will, but people deserve to have their art made fairly to then be judged fairly. It feels weird to hate on a salvaged cut of something that could have probably been better. Cause I don't hate this movie, and I certainly don't think it's the worst adaptation ever, as there's a clear visual respect for its source material and a passion to recreate it. But I think its soul got lost somewhere on the cutting room floor, leaving a shell of a movie that will never tell the story it was initially set out to tell, forever being known as simply a bad movie. If you made it this far, please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the kind of content I'm making. This is Balthazar, signing off.